Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance, the podcast where we serve up bite-sized pieces of financial advice to simplify your money and your life.
Dave Shotwell, welcome back to the show, my friend. How you been?
Hey, yeah, it's been like a whole week since I was here.
A whole week
I missed
without
one
you.
episode and just gonna get a whole bunch of pain over it.
Hopefully, I didn't burn the place down while you were gone. I thought we had a good. Kim and I had a good time last week, but you were missed for sure. So, where does our episode find you today? I know you've been kind of traveling around this winter.
Still being a snowbird here for another 24 hours. We are heading back north, and but it's sunny and in the mid 50s here in Greenville, South Carolina. And
Right.
it's been a good couple of weeks.
Well, I'd like to say that you're heading back to some sunshine and warmer weather, but it's Michigan, so maybe by the time you get here.
I've got to stop off in Ohio on the way, and Michigan in bad weather is still better than Ohio with good weather, right? So,
There you go.
I'll be ready to get home.
On that note, we are back with another episode of Retirement Planning Headlines of what we kind of read in February and what stuck out to us. So without further ado, let's jump into our first article here from Kiplinger. Tax planning and healthcare critical to efficient retirement planning. What say you, Mr. Shotwell, about tax planning and healthcare?
Everybody's favorite topics, right? But we call it job security, but healthcare and tax planning really can't be separated from retirement planning. There's just no way to do it as much as we'd like to. Nobody wants to talk about it. Complicated and no fun, but it's a necessary conversation to have when we're talking about retirement.
Well, and I will be self-serving here, but one of the reasons why you want to work with a retirement planner and not necessarily an investment manager when you're talking about planning your retirement is, like we talked about, investments isn't the only thing. You got to know how that impacts your health plan, healthcare decisions, how it impacts your taxes. Like, these things are more than ever intertwined. And so having someone with experience in those categories is super important to the success of your overall plan.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked about this particular article is it did come up with what I felt like were some decent questions that need to be addressed as part of the retirement planning process. So things like, have you explored Roth conversions and other tax-free investment options? Are you looking at your AGI to reduce taxes on Medicare premiums? Have you planned for long-term care costs? Does your financial plan account for legacy goals and potential tax burdens? These are all things that we go through as a part of our process.
Yeah.
Sometimes people forget about until it's too late.
Right. Well, and they're all intertwined, right? I mean, we can talk about Roth conversions and taxes, but that can impact your adjusted gross income and your Medicare premiums, but it can also then affect your legacy goals.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
the article had 3 bullet points. Have you thought about this? Have you thought? But all of those like work together as a whole, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, and it speaks to why financial planning, the cliche in the industry is it's a verb, not a noun, right? It's something you're doing all the time, ongoing, because needs change, markets change, longevity and health change, and all these things need to be considered on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like you said, because they're so intertwined, you really have to get a good idea of what your goals are and what's most important to you, because pulling one lever might lead to some bad outcomes in another one. And it's not to say that that's a bad idea to pull that lever, but you really got to base it on what's most important to you and what your long-term goals are, not necessarily what makes sense for today. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some interesting things to think about and to plan for sure. It wouldn't be a retirement headline review without a couple articles from the Wall Street Journal, Dave.
Well, of course.
And it wouldn't be March of 2025 without us talking about tariffs, right?
Yeah. So we pulled this article. It's more newsy than most of the things we cover on this episode of the podcast, right? But it's on the minds of every client that I've talked to, and I'm sure you're seeing the same thing over the
Mm-hmm.
last 3 or 4 weeks, if not, going back to election day. Tariffs, and what do they mean? Well, the Wall Street Journal did a very nice job this week in very like crayon terms that even somebody like me can understand of why. And what I liked about this is that it elucidates the fact that it's not cut and dry, right?
Right. Yeah.
And how tariffs work on the economy. First of all, we really don't know how people are going to react to different,
Mm-hmm.
and how companies are going to react. So they looked at three different types of goods that
Mm-hmm.
will be facing tariffs, with the idea that like a competitive good, like a commodity, and I think in the article they used tablecloths manufactured in China. People don't care where their tablecloths come from, right? So if China is facing a tariff that maybe doesn't affect all other countries that produce tablecloths quite the same way, people will just say, well, okay, mine will come from India then. And so you might see a small bump in the price, but you're not going to see like a 10% tariff is not actually going to probably mean a 10% increase in price. But then when you look at things that are competitive, or I'm sorry, that are more niche products, and they used like Italian wine in the article example. People that drink Italian wine, they like their Chianti, they're not going to just go grab a Cabernet from California instead,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And so those producers are more likely to increase the price to reflect the tariff because people will pay it. And they also pointed out, and I liked this too, that then that California producer who may have something similar, they're probably going to increase their price too, just because they can. Because now their competition has to increase their price.
Right.
They may not, like, if the price of a bottle of Chianti goes up by 25% because of a tariff, maybe they'll go up 15 or 20% on the California wine, just because, hey, if you want wine, you're gonna think we're a bargain, right? So that's kind of like a knock-on effect that like general inflation in the markets. And then they look too at expensive products with limited competition like cars.
Mm-hmm.
um, we can't adapt and we need them, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so they expect a very good amount of those tariffs to be passed through.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of nuance to the article. I recommend anybody who's interested in how this might play out to go read it.
Yeah, the interesting thing too, speaking of cars, that's come out recently, is basically the argument from GM and Ford was, you're punishing us, yet the Japanese automakers are getting off scot free on this, right? Like, and that is part of the problem of what they're trying to figure out right now is like, what can we do? How hard can we push? And what the actual effects are on the American companies, because there's because of the free trade agreement, we're so much more globalized that sometimes you don't even think about these little nuances. Like, there's been a lot of stuff in the Wall Street Journal and even in local newspapers about like how many times parts actually cross the border and what that means. If they're getting charged every time it crosses the border, and one part's crossing the border 15 times, like, that starts to add up real quick. So
You can debate whether those decisions made in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were good decisions or not, but the fact is that's where we're at.
yeah.
And it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. It's a good explainer piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Next article also coming from the Wall Street Journal, and it's about how to boost your retirement savings. So for a lot of people, retirement savings is hard, right?
Hmm. I've
And
heard. Yeah.
part of this is, especially for our younger generation or younger listeners, it just seems so far away that there's no real urgency, right?
Hmm.
And you've talked a lot on this podcast about how as humans we're so terrible at predicting the future, 10, 15, 20 years out. And so what the article gets at is there's been some studies about how to connect with the future a little bit better. And a good step might be imagining your future self and then going back to the present. I actually had some studies where they did some wording around like, hey, think about yourself in the
Yeah.
future and then go back to today and make that decision. And it really has kind of helped increase savings. I think there's 14% more likely to invest in long-term savings when they change some of the wording around this.
Do you remember? I meant to ask you this before we started rolling tape, but do you remember in the context of this article, it reminded me of maybe 4 or 5 years ago, one of the major like national brokerage firms actually did this experiment with AI software where they would take pictures of their clients and accelerate aging, like make the like take a picture of a 50-year-old and say this is what you're likely to look like at 75,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the profound effect that had on their willingness to save and think about their future, because it suddenly became very real. Like, hey, that's me 20 years from now. Oh my gosh, I want to take care of that dude.
I think we are at a conference and they were
Yeah,
putting up pictures of that. I can't remember who the speaker was or the company, but we'll have to try to find that and put it in the show notes.
that came to mind right away when I read this article that was.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, obviously wording is one thing, but also if you're a visual learner, to your point, like, you can go out and find, that kind of software that can make you look older. So, the difference of actually staring your future self in the eyes versus just thinking about it might make a profound difference on that. So yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I did remember that. We'll have to go look for who that was and if that's an option that's available out there. I'm sure some AI program somewhere.
It's probably gotten so accurate that it's scary, so people don't do it anymore.
Our final article from the Wall Street Journal is retirement advice and people you should speak to before retirement.
Yeah.
Um, first one on this list is no surprise, and hopefully you before you read this article you thought about this. But yes, you should probably check in with your spouse and make sure you're on the same page before you decide to retire.
It's generally a team sport.
Yeah. And if you're not on the same page, you should probably figure out, what that looks like.
Right. Yeah. Maybe retirement isn't the biggest topic to be discussing, but yeah, you got to start with the obvious when you do these things.
Right. Well, and we've had clients who, their spouse, who retired, and then when their spouse retired, and they were both living at home together 24 hours a day, and decided they didn't really like that, right?
Oh yeah.
So,
Somebody goes back to work a lot of the time. Yeah.
so something you definitely have to think about and have that conversation. The other, let's see, adult children. I thought this was interesting in terms of like, you know, you probably will want to know kind of where your adult children are in life. Are they going to have grandkids? How's that going to impact your plans? But also, are they going to be around to take care of you as you get older, and thinking through some of those decisions. Your doctor, which I thought was an interesting one. Are there health concerns out there? And I really think of this in terms of like, a lot of people, because they're so active at work, when they retire and they slow down, like, what are you going to do? Not only from like a social aspect, but also from a health aspect, right? If you don't have to get up, if you don't have to do things, if you don't have to be going around, are there some health decisions that you need to be thinking about and making as a part of retirement? Who's ever in charge of HRF at your office,
That one seems kind of obvious too. Yeah.
gathering information about your retirement plan, details, pensions, things like that. Siblings, I thought this one was interesting, especially if they're close to you. I mean, I guess from the aspect, if anybody's going to give it to you, truthfully and honestly, a lot of times siblings are really good at cutting out the BS. And
Yeah, that can be complicated. A lot of times there's competition going on. There's, issues you
right.
haven't resolved since you were 12.
Yeah.
So take that one with a grain of salt. But I think the main thing there is talk to some people that know you and understand you and that you trust, whether they're
Right.
siblings, friends,
Oh
cousins,
yeah.
whatever. But
Yep.
that was my takeaway from that point.
Yeah, it did have the caveat of if they're close to you.
Yeah,
So
right.
dependent on the relationship is how I translated that. Financial advisors on the list. I hope. trusted colleague. I thought that was an interesting one of,
Yeah.
getting advice from someone who works where you are, and talk about, are you retiring because you hate what's going on with the company right now, or is it actually
Yeah.
something that makes sense for you potentially? And then yourself, right? And this is a question we oftentimes talk about here, and that is, what are you retiring to? Are you retiring to something, or are you retiring from something? And
Right.
really having that internal conversation around, is your life going to be better as a result of this, right? Interestingly enough, there's another article from Kiplinger, and it was about the 6 people you should talk to before retiring. And what's interesting is they took a completely different view of this same kind of question of who you should be talking to before retirement, which I thought was kind of amusing. I'm not sure. I think the Wall Street Journal article came out first. But it was funny how, basically the same premises for an article can go in 2 completely different directions, right?
Yeah, they were very, very technical at the Kiplinger's outfit. Um, talk to your financial planner, talk to your tax person, talk to your estate planning attorney, insurance. I like the idea that they added a senior living advisor.
Yeah, that was something that you don't hear
Yeah,
often. Yeah.
yeah. Um, but I think if you take these two lists, I think to me it's a little funny to see like the soft side of it come from the Wall Street Journal. Talk to your
Right.
friends, talk to your family, make sure everybody's on board, and then Kiplinger's rolls in with like, oh, make sure you got the numbers nailed down, and they're
Yeah.
both right. They're both
Right.
right. They're both good.
Well, it's interesting too, now that you talk about it, because our process is kind of that in that order, right?
Hmm.
Like, first, let's figure out what's important to you and what, retirement looks like and what your goals
Right.
are. And then let's talk about your financial plan, your tax planning, your estate planning,
Yeah.
make sure you have all your ducks in a row,
Yeah.
and kind of
Figure
in
out how
that order.
the numbers to support
Yeah.
the decision. Yeah.
Interesting. Now that made me chuckle as I was going through and
Hmm.
prepping for this.
Yeah.
So another article from Kiplinger about the golden window. Do you know what the golden window is,
Yeah.
Dave?
Well, I do now. Yeah. Yeah. Sounds like something out of like a C.S. Lewis book or
Right.
something, but yeah.
I don't know who
Um,
gets to name these things, but I'm jealous. The golden window.
that little magic time where if you've got investments outside of retirement accounts
Mm-hmm.
and you retire, you may be in a very, very low tax situation. We've talked about this before, even though we didn't name it the golden window. We probably should have. We should have trademarked that. That nice period gives you time to do strategic things. Like you might have been plugging all your money into pre-tax investments while you were working to get yourself in a lower tax bracket while you were working. You've got maybe if you retire at 65, that golden window then is age 65 to 73 right now when
Right.
you'd have to start where you're required to take money out of your IRAs. And if you've got ways to make ends meet for the meantime, you can then put your tax budget to work converting some of that money into Roth IRA.
Yep. So there's a lot to kind of think
Hmm.
through as you look at this window, but just, I always like to start with like the basic premise of tax planning. Any tax planning is to pay taxes at the lowest rate possible, right? And so the
Right.
first thing that you have to do is figure out, what rate am I currently paying taxes at, and what is my likely anticipated rate in the future? And that doesn't come without issues, right? Because anytime you talk about future tax rates, you're making a guesstimate of
Right.
A, where you think you're going to be, but also B, what tax rates are going to be and what the tax tables will look like
Yeah.
at that point in time.
Yeah.
So it's not a perfect science, but sometimes it's so blatantly obvious that it does make a lot of sense to start doing some tax planning. And obviously, some of the benefits of that is you could potentially lower your lifetime taxes. You could hedge against future tax rate increases. And so that's something we talk about a lot here. Other things being equal, if you're asking me to make a bet on whether tax rates go down, stay the same, or go up, at some point the deficit has to get paid off. So I would lean towards go up, but it's probably not going to go up. What does it go up for everyone? Only certain people. It's pretty hard to understand. It's impossible to predict, is what I want to say. But also, it is a good hedge to think about how they might potentially go up. So that's one of those where like you don't want to do everything with the anticipation because you don't know what the future holds, but diversifying makes sense at that point.
And more it comes up to like, okay, maybe over my lifetime I'm going to pay as much or maybe even a little more in taxes, but what I really want to do is make sure that the money I leave to my kids goes to them tax efficiently, and that can weigh into the conversation too. So lots of moving parts as always.
Yeah, that's one of those, estate planning, income tax for your heirs, some of the rule changes, especially with, how IRAs have to be distributed now, pre-tax IRAs kind of impact some of those decisions that we're making now in tax planning. Um, Tax planning doesn't come without potential drawbacks, though, right? And so some of the things that we worry about or you have to be careful of is how if you're taking Social Security, your income directly impacts how much of your Social Security is taxed.
Yeah.
There's some issues with if you're in a 0% tax rate for capital gains, that might impact that. There is IRMA, which is the amount that you pay for Medicare premium goes up the more
Mm-hmm.
income that you have. So you have to pay attention to that.
Yep.
And something that wasn't in the article that I would add to that is if you're pre 65 retiree getting insurance from the marketplace, your subsidies are based on what your income is. And I actually had, a prospective client come in and ask, I did a Roth conversion, and now I have to pay all this extra money because I didn't get those premium subsidies. Like, what's going on with that? And have that conversation of, well, this is one of those things you should have looked at before you did the conversion.
I find though too, usually if the math made the Roth conversion make sense and all the other things made sense, it's a lot of times it's a psychological switch to think about that Medicare premium increase really working out to like a 2% additional
Right.
tax for the and
Mm-hmm.
and when you think about it, like, okay, would you have still done the Roth conversion at 24% instead of 22%? Probably. A lot of times it's about reframing it, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, I think that the main impetus is there's a lot of things that go into that. There's a lot of moving pieces and parts with taxes, and you can't just say, hey, I will probably be in a higher tax bracket in the future, so I'm going to do a Roth conversion without knowing that there's other things that can impact that calculation. Our next article is about the 4 things you lose in retirement, also from Kiplinger. The 4 things in no particular order: financial security, employee benefits, your social network, and your sense of purpose potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting because we talk about it a lot, but not everybody kind of
Yeah.
thinks of those things. And a lot of our conversation and last month was about the topic of how do you go from saver to spender, right? And so that financial security piece is all of a sudden that consistent paycheck isn't coming in, you got to live on your portfolio. That's a big transition for people.
It totally is. And a lot of people will just never make that switch. It's very difficult.
Employee benefits obviously go away, but what people don't always realize is it's not always healthcare. There's lots of other potential employee benefits that you got to think about. Most of us a lot of us get our sense of purpose and our social network from our work, and so
Mm-hmm.
you got to think about how you're going to replace that.
Right.
You're not going to replace it going, sitting at home every day and watching the soap opera and digest or whatever it is that you do every day. So thinking through what you're going to retire to again, right? This is one that I actually had to ask you to read as well and make some notes for me, make sense out of it for me, which is why we do this, right? Because even when we read it, we don't always understand what's going on.
This is one of those articles that like we're including it on this list more to like clarify and provide maybe a little balance to it.
Yeah.
So the title is going to get everybody's attention. Is the stock market still your best bet once you're age 55?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about the good points it raises, right? Obviously the stock market's volatile. You don't have as long a time frame anymore. Likely going to be using some of your investments to fund your retirement. You need to be more conservative. And I wholeheartedly support that. And I don't want anybody to have any more in stock in their portfolio with us than they're comfortable having, or that makes mathematical sense from our standpoint in terms of what their plan can endure.
Right. Yeah.
But the article treats it as though it's binary. And this is where I have a problem. There were a couple other little things about it, but the article treats it as though being in the stock market is an all or none decision, and that would definitely be a mistake. For I can't think of anybody that relies on their portfolio for income where I guess maybe if we just don't have big enough clients where their portfolio is such that they can have millions and millions and millions of dollars in stock and not worry about fluctuations at all.
Right.
But, I guess conceivably, it's not an either or proposition.
Yeah.
And my take on this article is being too invested in stock a safe bet once you're 55. And I
Right.
would say no.
Right.
That's about when we need to start thinking about retirement, even if we're not there yet. It's a good example of what we see a lot in the financial press. It's like halfway there, but it doesn't have the nuance required for most
Right.
people, and it's going to cause some damage. Like it might help someone, but it's also probably going to cause some damage to other people.
Yeah, I mean that's why I struggled with this one. Was it's like what like reading through the lines, and of course, I read retirement planning articles probably different than most people do. I'm always looking at it from the standpoint of who is this author trying to sell me something that I shouldn't
There's
be
that, yeah.
shouldn't be sold.
I'm always looking at it like, what about this am I going to have to explain to someone about how it doesn't apply to them? Or which is what we're doing right now. Well, what is the counter argument? Okay, so you're 55, life expectancies being what they are now, pick your number, but I don't know, say 90.
Sure.
You might be in retirement for like 35, 40 years. We know inflation is real, and we know the stock market is the one thing that tends to outpace inflation over time.
Right.
So unless you have enough saved up that you can put it all in a money market account and live off that for the rest of your life and not worry about inflation,
Right.
then that's fine. But for most people, having some thing in the portfolio, not 100%,
Right.
but having a healthy amount that is going to keep pace with inflation is an important part of retirement planning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 30 retirements are longer and longer, and so you have to have that growth aspect. But again, like you said, that doesn't mean you want all of it in growth. But and the danger of this article is it doesn't really explain those differences. Doesn't really give you a call to action. It just kind of makes you come away with it feeling like, okay, stocks are bad. I need to do something different, right?
Right,
And that's
right.
not the case. 100% stock portfolio, probably not appropriate when you're over
Yeah,
55.
right.
But just as not appropriate as that is probably a 0% stock portfolio, right?
Yeah, yeah.
As always, the truth lies somewhere in between, right?
As always.
Our last article comes from US News talking about the 2025 retirement landscape, talking about some of the potential financial hurdles this year.
Hmm.
The first one being inflation concerns. I was kind of hoping we were over and done with the inflation conversation, but not so fast, my friends, right?
Well, the tariff landscape, along with some other potential political initiatives, could lead to more inflation. We will
Yeah.
see. We've
Yep.
talked about that already.
Uncertain markets. Uncertainty
Really?
seems
Are
to
they?
be the word for the markets lately.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because it's funny, but it's not funny.
Right.
Ironic, I guess. But, we're sitting here in early March 2025. The markets have been really rocky for the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Most people's portfolios, though, probably aren't nearly as bad as what the newspaper makes them think they are right now. If they're
Yeah.
diversified, particularly if they're not 100% stock, but even in what
Right.
a diversified 100% stock portfolio doesn't look nearly as bad as what the headlines might make you believe.
Right.
So, but the tenor, the mood of people right now, you'd think we were on the verge of the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
and I guess we talk about being contrarians a lot, but when everybody is this nervous about the markets, I tend to think that it maybe won't be as bad then.
Yeah. Right.
So the opposite case being the best example of that, like we've talked about before in early 2000, when 80-year-olds would come into our offices and say, my son-in-law says I should put everything in MCI WorldCom, whatever that
Yeah.
is.
Right.
Here's my last $100,000 CD that just matured, let's put it all into telecom stocks. That was when you run away, right?
Right. Right.
And when those same people are afraid the market's going to go to zero, it actually means they've already taken their money out, or a lot of people have, and or are
Yeah.
sitting on there like waiting to see what happens. So anyway.
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely an interesting part of like what's going on right now, right? Like the things that have usually, in my experience, been the worst to the economy and the market are things that nobody knew were coming, right?
Right.
And so, like, if everybody's bracing for impact, it's probably not going to come.
Well, maybe, yeah. But I guess the foil to that is what has everyone on edge is just the very uncertainty of what, like we're in uncharted waters. And I guess going back, like I said, it feels like when you talk to people, it's like COVID. COVID was very much uncharted waters. We had never stopped the economy before,
Right.
right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then restarted it. It was like, okay, we're putting the paddles on it. What's going to happen?
Hmm.
When we're dealing with like big changes at the government level, big changes to international trade and global relations like we've not seen in our lifetimes. So the unsettled feeling is real, but also like you said, it's the thing we haven't imagined. Well, the problem I think here is we can't really imagine what the thing is at this point. We just know it's unsettling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good, great point.
As Mom always said, this too shall pass, Nick.
Yes, indeed. The other couple things on this list, balancing risk and return. And I think that's important heading into
Mm-hmm.
2025, like making sure
Always.
you're in the right, yeah, always is the key there too. But, I guess with interest rates where they are, cash and CDs have become more tempting. And if, history has taught us anything, is that is not a great long-term strategy when you compare it to what inflation looks like. And so you got to be careful with that, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you still maintain the right level of risk and not get, sucked into the fact that some of the more conservative investments are paying what appears to be a high rate right now. And then also Social Security, right? 2.5% raise that they're projecting in 2025. So is that keeping up with inflation and your cost of living, or are you going to need to think about taking more withdrawals out of your portfolio to cover that, the costs of goods and services and things that you're doing? And how does that play into your overall retirement plan?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some good things to think about. Definitely, some questions that should be answered, which is why we believe in doing regular reviews and looking at your plan and updating it, so that some of these things that come up and change, we are planning for ahead of time and making sure that your plan is still on track. I know you, Dave, and I are firm believers in, like you said earlier, financial planning is an ongoing process. It's not an end point. It's a living, breathing thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
With that, it has been a pleasure, Dave, and looking forward to next time.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.
This is a Zedia Media production.